Jono, it's been a few weeks since we spoke. Can we run through round 7 of the AFL?
G'day, Cam. Yes, good to hear your voice once again. Round 7 of the AFL, there were some lopsided games last weekend. Started on the Thursday night with the Swans proving far too strong for the undermanned doggies, getting over the line by 66 points at Marvel Stadium. The poor old dogs can't take a trick at the moment with their injuries, missing the likes of English, Lobb, Liberatore, uh, Bontempelli played, but he proved to be sensational on the night. But did look a little bit underdone with his left knee heavily bandaged. But yeah, and Sam Darcy obviously going down the week before with an ACL injury. So the Dogs, who a few weeks ago, Cam, were around about the premiership favourite status, have now diminished out of the favourites markets altogether, with a host of key players going down.
They have now. They're sitting in that wildcard situation at the moment. The D's, they had a good win or a big win over the cellar dwellers, the Tigers.
Yeah, the Tigers are battling, unfortunately, and well done to Kingy, Stephen King, coach of Melbourne this year. He's really got them playing a really good brand of footy, fast and exciting and high-scoring brand, which is great for the Melbourne supporters, but not so much for the Tigers fans. They were 9 goals in the deficit, and that's around about their average losing margin for the year thus far.
And last time that we spoke, the Suns were absolutely flying high. Since we haven't spoken, they've had a few losses. Then they had a terrible loss really against the Hawks. But the Hawks, the rebuild, is it complete?
Yeah, well, it's looking that way, though. Scores were pretty close at half time, and it took a fair old-fashioned spray from Sam Mitchell to his midfield group, and in particular Lloyd Meek, the ruckman, at half time. But I responded to Hawks, and 49-point victors see the Suns now drop down to 7th on the ladder. And yeah, the question marks are starting to be asked of your Suns, Cam, who were premiership favourites a few weeks back.
What they need is they need some time in Darwin because it's Fortress TIO Stadium. They've never lost there. That will get them back on a winning run.
Absolutely. They should move their whole base to Darwin.
Magpies big winners over the Dons.
Yeah, massive Anzac Day and a huge crowd at the G once again. 77 points, the Pies over the Bombers. Scott Pendlebury, he's only 2 games away from breaking the all-time games record for the AFL VFL competition. He's 38 years old, and the man had 43 disposals and kicked 2 goals and absolutely brained the Bombers on the weekend. Father Time has not caught up with that man. He is just silk.
Your Pats really should have won this one. Well, I would imagine they would have highlighted as a game that they should win, but they went down to Port in Adelaide.
Yes, we'll be very coy on this one, Cam. 5 goals, the power overcoming the Cats. I did say to a couple of mates on the Friday that this is a bit of a danger game for the Cats because they generally, a couple of times throughout the year, will drop games that they expect to win. And turns out I was correct, and the Port were too strong for the Cats.
Brio, they've got themselves cemented in the top 4.
Yeah, they have, Cam. They're looking good, the Dockers. 14 points over the Blues. The Blues overcoming what was a pretty ordinary week for them after the Elijah Hollins fiasco the week before. But they played all right, Carlton. They kicked the last 3 goals, I think, of the game to make the scoreboard look a little bit more pleasant from their behalf. But yeah, Freo are looking good.
And the Saints, big winners, 143 over the West Coast Eagles, 42, 101 the margin.
Yeah, absolutely belted the Eagles. They were sort of thereabouts at the start, West Coast, but yeah, they didn't give a yelp against the Saints, who were just way too strong all over the park. We'll talk about the Eagles shortly because, believe it or not, they might be half a chance to win a game next week.
And what about the Lions? Big win over the Crows. The Crows sort of really slipped down the ladder.
Yeah, and I thought the Crows would be right up there this year, but they've dropped a couple of games, and this is quite a big loss for the Crows. They've lost games this year, but they've been close margins, whereas this one, the Lions got right on top of them up at the Gabba, and the Lions just letting the competition know that they are still about.
And the 6th place North Melbourne Kangaroos went down to the GWS. Was there a little bit of controversy in this one?
There certainly was. There was a goal kicked at one point by the Giants, which was clearly touched by North, and the Arc overruled it and called it a goal. And it was at a stage of the game where if it had have been overruled and been given a behind like it should have been, North were well and truly in the hunt. Whether it was going to have a bearing over the result in the end, We don't know, but yeah, poor old North. They don't need little things like that going against them, particularly when they're having a great start to the year.
Oh, it's so good to see them back up towards the top of the ladder. Speaking of the ladder, let's have a quick look of it before we get into this weekend's games. The top six: Swans, Freo, Hawks, D's, Lions, and North. We've got the wildcard section 7 through to 10: Suns, Collingwood, Cats, and the Dogs. And then from 11 through to 18: Port, Saints, Crows, GWS, the Eagles, Carlton, Essendon, and Tigers down the bottom. Any thoughts, any surprises, any big moves?
I still can't get my head around the wild card section, Cam. I don't like it. Like, give me the top eight, leave it at the top eight. But anyway, it's yeah. A big surprise is probably Melbourne at this point, and Melbourne and North Melbourne. So the Kangas sitting in sixth and the D's sitting in fourth. They're the two surprises. But yeah, the Swans, they were crippled by injuries last year, so they've got to be an excuse for what happened with them last year. But sitting on first is no surprise. Doctors in second. They were always going to be up thereabouts this year. Another year under the belt for a lot of their players, and then the Hawks in third. So, no, not too many surprises in the top section of the ladder, Cam.
Let's get into this weekend, which is round 8. It all starts Thursday night. The 8th place Magpies up against the 3rd place Hawks.
And Scott Pendlebury, who we were just speaking about, who absolutely brained him, he won't play Thursday night. I think he's been ruled out with leather poisoning after his 43 disposal game on Anzac Day. But the 5-day break doesn't help him, so he won't play Thursday night. The Pies, they were pretty good against the Bombers, but I think the Hawks should be just too strong for them, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be tipping the Hawks in that one. Western Bulldogs up against the Dockers. A couple of weeks ago, this would be a top of the table clash, but at this stage, you'd have to say the Dockers would be pretty short favourites despite the travel.
Yeah, you would, Cam, and purely due to the loss of personnel from the Doggies and, the key players that they do have out, you just can't replace some of those guys. So in saying that, you'd have to say the Dockers should come over and beat them in Marvel Stadium.
Next game we see is the Crows up against Port Adelaide. We've got another local derby there at Adelaide Oval.
Yeah, this one's the showdown, Cam. So Friday night, 8:10 my time. The Crows should bounce back. If the Crows are a genuine finals contender, which most people believe they are, they really should be beating Port Adelaide over there. But Port Adelaide, historically, are one of those teams that really get themselves up, and they're a passionate side for these big games. Kenny Hinkley was very good at rousing him up and getting him over the line in these situations. So we'll see how Josh Carr goes. But in saying that, I'm going to have to go with the Crows.
And of course, Port bring last week's form into the game where they got up over your Cats.
Correct. Don't mention that.
I'm going to go the other side of the coin there. I'll be going for Port there. We've got the 17th placed Essendon Bombers up against the 5th place Lions. However, the game is at Marvel Stadium.
I don't think it'll make any difference where this one's played, Cam. The Bombers are pretty ordinary at present. You really can't see any light at the end of the tunnel for them. They're sitting in 17th place on the ladder, and the Lions, particularly what they showed last week, should be far too strong here.
Will it be a 50-plus margin?
Yes.
Okay, let's get on to the next one. The West Coast Eagles in 15th place up against the 18th place Richmond Tigers. You alluded to this before. We're both going to back the Eagles in on this one, aren't we?
We're going to have to with the Eagles at home, and poor old Tigers, but they do have a lot of young kids, Richmond, as do the Eagles, but a lot of high draft picks too, the Tigers. So I think Richmond fans, they just need to be patient for a little bit longer, and it'll eventually click with these young blokes. And hopefully they'll be back up the ladder for Tigers fans' sake. But Eagles at home should get the job done. There is a market running at the moment whether or not Richmond will actually win a game for the year now, which at the start of the year wouldn't have thought that would be the case. But their form hasn't been great. Like I said, I think the average winning margin's around about the 9-goal mark. Average losing margin around about the 9-goal mark. So saying that, Cam, the Eagles should be too strong.
No, I'm going to back the Eagles in this one, but I do believe Richmond will get a win this season. Will it be against the Blues? Will it be against the Bombers? I'm going to say against the Bombers. They'll snatch the victory there. Your Cats up against North Melbourne, the battle of the blue teams. The Cats in the navy blue. And how would you describe the North Melbourne? Is that more of a royal blue?
Royal blue, light blue. But either way, this is a danger game for Geelong. And on the form they presented last week, they're likely to flick a switch and turn it right around. But North are no easy beats anymore, as we are aware, sitting in sixth on the ladder. The Cats will be minus Mark Blixarves, who went down with a knee injury last week, and he's probably going to be out for another 6, I would suspect. Early signs are pointing towards a lateral ligament strain. So that's not good. He's the greatest Band-Aid the game has ever seen. I think Mark Blixarves, he can play anywhere. I still think he most likely rocks up on a weekend to play and goes into Chris Scott's office and says, "Where would you like me to play today?" That's how versatile he is. So the Cats will miss him greatly. But if they're any grain of salt, the Cats this year's Cam, they got to beat North Melbourne at home.
Look, it's in Geelong. Cats go in as massive favourites. So I am going to tip the Cats in that one. Blues up against the Saints.
Blues were pretty good against Freo over in WA. But yeah, toss of the coin here. Saints are the favourites, clear favourites for this one. I wouldn't be surprised if the Blues get the job done, but I will pick the Saints. I don't know why, but I will.
Yeah, I'll be tipping the Saints in that one. Top of the table, Sydney Swans up against the fourth place, Melbourne Demons. This is going to be a cracker.
It will be a cracker. These are playing great footy, but Sydney are just on paper look way too strong. And obviously at the SCG, it's a fortress there for them. I suspect they'll get over the line against Melbourne. Will it be comfortable? I don't think, but you never know. This will be the real big test for the Ds. So we'll know where Melbourne's at come 6 o'clock on Sunday, Arvo.
We will. I'll be tipping the Swans there at the SGCG. And up there on the Gold Coast, the Gold Coast Suns look like they want to play themselves back into some form up against their fellow newcomer, GWS.
Yeah, and they need to, Cam. If they started beautifully, they had those few wins on the board, then Christian Petrarca, new recruit, went down with an injury. They sort of lost a bit of momentum after that. They need to regain that form if they're going to stay in touch with the top section of the ladder. Currently sitting in 7th. A loss here, obviously they drop, and they just got to keep winning. They can't afford your Suns to not win their home games because their form away from home historically isn't great, which is something that they have been working very hard on. So in saying that, Cam, Gold Coast at home probably should be just too strong for the Giants.
Well, that's round 8, Jono. Since we last spoke, you've done a little bit of travelling. Understand that you went over to the Tiwi Islands and watched one of the games in the Tiwi Island Football League.
I did. It was amazing. I've never seen so many 50-metre bullet passes that hit targets. And there were some kicks there that hit teammates on the chest, and you could actually hear the thud from the boundary line. That's how hard the ball hit the chest. So there's some serious talent over there. I saw a lot of guys, saw a lot of bounces. If bounces were a stat, there would have been a whole game's record broken for that game that I watched over there the other week. But it was fantastic. I loved every minute of being over there.
Who are the two teams you got to see?
Now, you'll know this better than me. It was the Hawks, and which is your Hawks.
So they play in the Hawks colours, but it's the Tapalinga Superstars. Yep. So Tapalinga Superstars up against?
They wore Fremantle Dockers colours.
Up against the Jikalaru Dockers.
There you go. You're all over it, Cam.
Very good. Enjoy the weekend of footy, John.
Go Cats.
We'll chat next week.
Go Cats.